Hello. Philippe, a paralyzed millionaire, struggled with boredom in the society of the aristocrats of Paris and seeked the meaning of life in high art. Driss, an unemployed person from the slums, mindlessly enjoyed life, drank with friends and chased skirts. Thanks to fate, they met, and this meeting was the beginning of something very important in the fate of both men. At night, a black car cruised along the streets of Paris. Philippe, an old, bearded man, and his driver, Driss, were sitting in it. Suddenly, Driss stepped on the gas and ran a red light. He skillfully swerved between lanes, pulling ahead in the flow of traffic. His extreme driving skills were spotted by the police and he was chased by them. Philippe, the passenger, praised Driss and they bet €100 to see if he could outrun the chase. They drove into a dead end and Driss proposed a new bet that the skirmish would end not with arrest, but rather with an honorary escort. The policeman rounded up Driss and demanded Philippe to get out of the car. But the man was paralyzed and could not do it. The disabled began to simulate an epileptic attack, and Driss blamed the police for detaining a terminally ill person who urgently needed to see a doctor. The frightened inspectors offered to escort them to the nearest hospital. "What a disgusting thing, Philippe, aren't you ashamed? How do you even get this foam?" exclaimed Driss. The driver turned on the music and the motorcade flew forward while the men shook their heads merrily as they sang along to the vocalist. The police left them at the hospital. The heroes smoked and drove off before the doctors arrived. Retrospectively, in a posh mansion, Philippe and his secretary Magali were interviewing applicants for the position of a nurse. There were expensive paintings hanging on the walls and Faberge eggs on the shelves. The same Driss was also sitting in the queue. "I want to help people, I guess. Is that okay? Is that okay with you? It's a nice neighborhood. I'm kind of attracted to disabled people," replied the candidates when asked about their key motivation for the job. The candidates were competing to see who could bore the employer more. Driss couldn't stand it and cut off the queue and went in, out of turn. And instead of being sycophantic, he immediately began to make fun, was rude and flirted with the secretary. "It's just that humor is like music for you, you don't get it at all," said Driss. He didn't want a job. On the contrary, he wanted 3 waiver signatures to get unemployment benefits. But Philippe replied that he could not sign the document, because he was paralyzed up to the neck. So he offered to let him come back for the paper the next day. Driss agreed and returned home to the sleeping area. He greeted friends drinking amongst the stone jungle and walked up to a flat with narrow corridors crowded with screaming children. Even in the bathroom there was no privacy. Gotten involved with bad company. In the evening, Driss' mother came home. He gave her a Faberge egg stolen from the mansion. 6 months without seeing you. Not a single call, nothing. And now you turn up with a Kinder Surprise egg," exclaimed Driss' mother. The woman was angry that her son does not help the family and lives with her like a hotel. She drove him away. Driss met his friends in the alley. They drank, ate cheap food and smoked. When everyone left, the guy had nowhere to go, so he wandered around the area at night. He only managed to get warm and sleep a little in the subway train. At the appointed time, Driss showed up at the gate of the mansion. Yvonne, who acted as a butler, met him and took him inside the house and showed him the bedroom, which would be leased to the boss's nurse under contract. Driss was impressed by the size of the bed, as well as the luxurious private bathroom where no one would disturb him. He took the paper from Philippe which had the coveted signature that guaranteed an allowance. "Does it not bother you at all that you live at the expense of others and your conscience does not bother you?" asked Philippe. "No, thank you." "And you?" replied Driss. The man offered the guy a trial period of a month and bet that he would not last even 2 weeks. After a night of wandering around, the guy did not think long. But he did not manage to sleep on a soft bed and decided it was time to work. The masseuse showed Driss, who fell asleep on the move, how to stretch the muscles of a disabled person and how to properly seat him in a chair. Disgusted, the guy also learned to wash his boss hair and put on his compression stockings. It was then Philippe's turn to make fun. "You see, it's not scary at all. You have a very beautiful earring, just for the occasion," said Philippe. "Can you cut the joke?" replied Driss. Driss begged at least not to make him wipe the man's arse. The matter was put aside for later. Philippe's daughter, Elisa, also lived in the house, whom Driss ran into periodically. Elisa behaved brazenly and Driss somehow scared her and her boyfriend away when they came to make out on the roof of the mansion. The new assistant learned how to properly feed the boss, He parsed his letters with him and of course enjoyed the luxury and glamour of staring at Magali. He did not always carry out the task responsibly, and Yvonne even noticed a butterfly knife and a collapsible baton in his belongings. It was not yet clear what to expect from such a man. When it was time to head outside the mansion, Driss refused to drag Philippe into a ridiculous handicapped minivan. It was just humiliating, considering that the coolest sports car was parked next to it. So the choice was obvious. The heroes visited an art exhibition where Philippe was eyeing a painting worth 30,000 euros. Driss wondered what was so valuable about it. It was just a red blot on a white background. Philippe retorted that art is worth so much because it is the only way to leave an eternal mark on this world. Bullshit, Philippe. For 50 euros, I will buy paint and make a full splash out of it. I will even add some blue for free, replied Driss. Driss smoked furtively outside while Philippe met up with an old acquaintance. He had made inquiries. It turns out that his new employee served 6 months in prison for breaking into a jewelry store. But that's not what's important. Driss did not flatter or pity him, but treated him as an equal, so he was willing to overlook his past. Driss wasted no time and lured the secretary into his room. He wanted to show her his bath and offered her a bath. To his surprise, the girl agreed, unbuttoning her blouse. But it was only a joke and she hurried away from the joyful lad rather than bathing. In the evening, Magali wrote down a poem for Philippe. It was part of a romantic letter he sent to Eleanor. Driss was eavesdropping on the radio and Yvonne rebuked him for it. The inconsiderate lad embarrassed her with questions about lovers and matched her up with the local gardener, Albert, who had his eyes on her. At night Driss heard strange noises on the radio and went up to check on Philippe. He found the man in a deplorable state, he had a fever and had difficulty breathing. Driss stayed in the room all night and took him out for a walk during the next attack. These attacks are called phantom pains and there is no cure for them, said Philippe. The men saw beautiful girls and Driss asked how Philippe managed to get pleasure. Does it give you a thrill to have your ears licked? Asked Driss. During the next pain attack, the guy offered his boss to smoke. He was surprised, but took a few puffs. The characters go to a restaurant. Philippe talked about his wife Elisa, whom he loved very much. But it was a tragic love affair. The woman had 5 miscarriages, and then died of an illness. But they were left with an adopted daughter, Elisa, whom Driss met at the mansion. In his youth, Philippe was involved in extreme sports and was a risk-taker, but in the end he was paralyzed due to an unsuccessful paragliding flight. Driss' probation had just come to an end and Philippe congratulated him, but also asked him to return the stolen Faberge egg. It was a gift from his late wife, who used to give him eggs on every anniversary of their life together. The guy did not admit to his deed, although he did it so clumsily that he gave himself away. Driss met up with his sister, whom he assigned to find the egg at his mother's house. And he pulled out his troubled brother, who was caught for selling illicit substances, from the police. Philippe dictated another letter to his lady of the heart. Driss was allowed into the process and inserted his caustic comments. This time, the verses seemed too pretentious and incomprehensible to him. He was shocked that the boss had never seen this woman, even though he had been in correspondence with her for 6 months. Philippe replied that a deep spiritual connection with a person was much more important to him. With a person, okay, but what if she is a toad? Then you will have a soul connection with the toad, commented Driss. How subtle, replied Philippe. Driss grabbed the letters and started opening them, which angered Philippe. He found Eleanor's phone number and immediately dialed her, despite his boss's increasingly angry orders to stop. The man continued to argue while the girl hung up, but eventually Philippe gave in and talked with the girl for several days. Eleanor told him that she was not a toad at all and wanted a photograph of Philippe in the letter, which made him very uneasy. Driss reassured the boss. His wealth outweighed all the cons. And what was even more important, the girl read and answered his letters and poems for half a year. Up in the north, guys drink and beat women, she'll be safe here with you, said Driss. The heroes went to the opera house. The performance began, and the singing tree amused Driss so much that he disturbed the spectators around him with his laughter. Back at home, the men select a photo to send to Eleanor. Philippe was worried and thought of attaching a photo in which he was not paralyzed yet, so as not to scare the girl away. Driss convinced him not to do that and inserted a more current photo. But as soon as the assistant left, Philippe still asked Yvonne to change the photos. At this point, Philippe's daughter burst in on Driss and demanded cigarettes. Elisa distracted him from painting and this behavior infuriated him. He went to Philippe and asked for paternal care, and offered to give the insolent girl a slap with his own hands, since the boss was already paralyzed. Yvonne nodded silently. Philippe seemed more concerned that his assistant had begun to draw, but he also tried to reason with his daughter, though without beatings. Driss, on the other hand, wasted no time and experimented with the easel in his free time. "Did you draw this?" asked Magali. "That's great," commented Yvonne. With Philippe, Driss spent a lot of time on walks and added extra horsepower to the weak stroller motor. It was Philippe's birthday and Yvonne gathered his whole family. Philippe called such a gathering a service. For the occasion, an entire orchestra was invited to the mansion, but Elisa sat in her room and did not go out to the guests. Driss found her upset. It turns out that Bastien had broken up with her and she had even swallowed pills. Fortunately, the pills were not dangerous. The guy had broken up with her and insulted her, so she offered Driss to teach him a lesson and was even ready to pay him. Philippe meanwhile, with a smile on his face, inflated the price of the Driss painting. His friend was hesitant, but clearly took the offer of 11,000 euros seriously. Driss found out from Yvonne that Magali sometimes gossiped about him and recently had a fight with her boyfriend. He was full of hope. Philippe unsuccessfully tried to introduce Driss to symphonic music, but he just laughed at the melodies from the commercials. Instead he turned on the dance music and threw himself into the dance floor, infecting his guests with his fervor. The evening ended with a disco. While tucking his boss to bed, Driss opened a letter from Eleanor with her photo. Philippe was very fond of the girl's appearance. She wrote that she would soon be passing through Paris and offered to make an appointment. Driss also found time to fix Elisa's problem. "So, Bastien? Do you recognize me?" asked Driss. "Yes, why?" replied Bastien. "What did you say to Elisa there?" "That's not good," replied Driss. Philippe was very nervous before the date. He took a long time to choose an outfit, arrived early, and then tried to ease his anxiety with alcohol. But in the end, he couldn't stand it and ran off before the girl arrived. Driss, meanwhile, arrived at his mother's work, who had to work as a cleaner to make a living. He saw the woman finish her shift and leave, but hesitated to speak to her. Furthermore, the boss just called and asked him to pick him up. The men escaped their thrilling encounters by taking to the skies in a private jet. Philippe handed Driss an envelope, 11,000 euros from the sale of his first painting. The flights continued, but this time Philippe invited Driss to try paragliding. He did not immediately agree to such madness, but in the end he did not miss this opportunity either. After returning to the mansion, Driss, to his surprise, met his troubled brother inside, who found out the address of the employer in the employment center and came for help. He was in trouble again with the law. This time it was more serious. Philippe saw that Driss was immersed in family problems and asked about Adama. It turns out that he was his cousin, and Driss' mother was actually his aunt. Driss himself was actually called Bakary. His real parents lived in Senegal, and when he was a child they gave him up to a family of childless relatives who lived in Paris. But then his aunt was able to have children. And after his uncle died, she gave birth to other children with other men. Philippe suggested Driss take care of his family and leave his job. He agreed and soon quit his job. He bid goodbye to the servants, and it turns out that Yvonne and Magali have been leading the guy around by the nose all this time. The girl was not interested in men at all. Driss left the mansion and accidentally discovered that Philippe had switched the photo to hide his illness from Eleanor. The new assistant, who was hired to replace Driss, made Philippe sad. The man grew a beard and suffered from emotional breakdowns. Nothing pleased him. Driss returned to his hometown and solved Adama's problems. With a sparkling display of erudition at a job interview, he got a job as a driver at a transport company. Meanwhile, Philippe was getting worse and Yvonne called his former assistant to help. The two men drove a wheelbarrow through Paris at night, running into adventures. This was the same scene from the beginning of the story. After being escorted to the hospital by the police, they drove through France to meet the sunrise on the North Sea coast. Driss shaved Philippe and again took advantage of his helplessness for pranks. "I tried very hard, now open your eyes," said Driss. "What a horror, it is horrible," exclaimed Philippe. They arrived at a restaurant, where an unsuspecting Philippe discovered that Driss had arranged a date for him with Eleanor. In parting, he also returned the stolen Faberge egg to him. The girl arrived and Philippe, who could no longer escape, could not hold back tears of happiness and gratitude. By the way, this story was based on real events. The real Philippe happily married a second time and even has 2 daughters. Driss opened a business, married and has 3 children. And they are still close friends. The title of the film, as always, is in the description of the video. In the meantime, tell us in the comments if you have a friend who knows how to get you out of routine and make you feel the taste of life again. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so that great stories come out as often as possible.